Hello, everybody. I have an important question to ask you. Are you the property of the state, or are you a free individual? Do you live in a state where the politicians, bureaucrats, deep state operatives, and others believe that you are their property and thus the property of the state? For instance, in New York recently, and in Philadelphia, they have a soda tax. And they say it is to make you drink less soda. Now I realize that sodas aren't that great for you, but should the government be responsible and dictate to you what you can drink? The choice is yours. It's not the choice of the state. It's not the choice of some bureaucrat. It's not the choice of some politician. But it is your choice. And it's supposed to be your choice. But there are many in the government of the United States who believe that you are too stupid and too dumb to make your own decisions. But the choice should be yours. Now, Cecil B. DeMille made two versions of the Ten Commandments. The first version he made in 1923 was a silent film version, which is a great video to watch. And the second version came out in 1956 with Charlton Heston as Moses and stuff like this, which we all know was a great movie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Almost 4 hours long. Cecil B. DeMille in the 1956 version comes on stage himself before the start of the movie and asks an important question. Are you the property of the state? He realized back in the 1950s that there was a tremendous move on in the government to make you the property of the state. This is a battle that we are still fighting. Here is Cecil B. DeMille.
Ladies and gentlemen, young and old, this may seem an unusual procedure, speaking to you before the picture begins. But we have an unusual subject, the story of the birth of freedom, the story of Moses. As many of you know, the Holy Bible omits some 30 years of Moses' life. From the time he was a 3-month-old baby and was found in the bulrushes by Bithia, the daughter of Pharaoh, and adopted into the court of Egypt, until he learned that he was Hebrew and killed the Egyptian. To fill in those missing years, we turn to ancient historians such as Philo and Josephus. Philo wrote at the time that Jesus of Nazareth walked the earth, and Josephus wrote some 50 years later and watched the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. These historians had access to documents long since destroyed, or perhaps lost, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. The theme of this picture is whether men are to be ruled by God's law or whether they are to be ruled by the whims of a dictator like Ramesses. Are men the property of the state, or are they free souls under God? This same battle continues throughout the world today.
If you don't have the Ten Commandments in your library at home, I strongly recommend that you go to Amazon.com, or your favorite distributor of movies, and buy the Ten Commandments. Below is a link to an Amazon site that has the 50th anniversary edition of the Ten Commandments that contains both the silent film version and the 1956 version. The silent film version is a lot of fun. You ought to watch it. You'll enjoy it. Now, we are still fighting to be free. The government wants to take away everything that's mentioned in the Constitution called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Government bureaucrats, politicians, deep state operatives, the CIA, the FBI, all the government agencies do not like the Bill of Rights. They want to take away the Bill of Rights, and they want to see the Bill of Rights destroyed. There are many out there that are promoting gun laws and gun registration and stuff like this. But if you take away the Second Amendment, the First Amendment will soon follow. It is already being promoted that your freedom of speech, which is covered in the First Amendment, the freedom of the press, which is covered in the First Amendment, and the freedom of religion, which is also covered in the First Amendment, they're trying to take that away also. We are still fighting the American Revolution to be free. We need to continue this fight day to day, hour to hour, because your freedom, my freedom, is so important. It is up to us to remember that our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom to bear arms is so important to us. Our freedom in the Fourth Amendment that covers stuff like the government spying on you and listening to all your conversations and storing your conversations in a database. That everything you say on the internet, every conversation you've had using a cell phone, everything is stored in an NSA database. Our freedoms are being eroded one by one by the deep state, by the agencies of the government that despise the Constitution of the United States that they swore to uphold. On August 18, 2018, Anand posted his research on the Pew Research Board about the Federal Reserve Act and other acts of Congress. The first is the Emergency Banking Act that dates from March 9th, 1933. The year my father was born, by the way. He was born in April. So this was dated from before my father was born. And anyway, this Emergency Banking Act declared that the Treasury of the United States was bankrupt. And they put all currency and everything in the hands of private bankers known as the Federal Reserve. This posting and the following postings are excruciatingly interesting. And he even verifies it. If you want to, you can look up the congressional records and stuff that he cites. This is important stuff because they take away your rights and make you the property of the state. Now you should pause this video and read this posting for yourself. It will take you a little bit of time, but it is worth it. And the following postings, I'm not going to read them to you, and I strongly suggest that you go to the Q Research Board, which is referenced on this slide at the bottom. And if you download the PDF, you can just click on the link, and it will take you to the Q Research Board that you're looking for. This is what your government is doing to you. They do not believe that you are free and individual, like the Constitution of the United States says, and like the Declaration of Independence says, that we have inalienable rights. They say, no, you belong to us, and you are a slave of the state. There is a huge difference between a Federal Reserve note and a United States note. Now I want you to take a careful look at this old bill from 1953, which happened to be a United States note. The first thing I want you to notice, it says United States note across the top and not Federal Reserve note. The second thing I want you to notice, that at the bottom of the bill, it says payable to the bearer on demand. Now what payable to the bearer on demand means, there was a gold standard. And in a gold standard, payable to the bearer on demand meant you got the value of gold for that bill. If you asked for a gold coin, you would get a gold coin. Now, the Federal Reserve Act was designed and written by a German national who was repatriated into the United States in 1903 through Ellis Island, New York. His name was Paul Warburg, and who was a carbon copy of Alexander Levine Hamilton. Mr. Warburg was a Sabbatinian German Jewish banker and CFO of the Rothschild banking empire. Mr. Warburg's assignment was to craft a piece of legislation designed to control the finances of the United States Corporation from Europe. The Federal Reserve Act is approximately 1,500 pages and places the currency and finance of the United States corporation under a private corporation called the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Sabbatean Rothschild banking empire, and not by the people or the corporate government of the United States. The Federal Reserve is not federal at all. The Federal Reserve is a private bank owned by the Rothschilds. There is nothing federal about it. You need to read about the Federal Reserve Act, because your money is not backed by gold. It's not backed by Congress. It's not backed by anything but by hearsay by the Rothschilds. If they wanted to liquidate the Federal Reserve Bank, you would be penniless. Think about it. The Federal Reserve Act is not your friend. The Federal Reserve is not your friend. They are actually enemies of the United States. I'm going to talk to you now about House Rule or House Resolution 1491 and House Resolution 4960, the right to own silver or gold. Now, these two bills were approved in 1933, and they were approved secretly, and they included the confiscation of all gold from the American public by the federal government. Now, we are living in what I would call a fascist dictatorship. This is not the land of the free anymore. One of the things on this slide, which I researched and checked out for myself, is the legal term license. And a license is defined in all modern law dictionaries as a permit to do something unlawful. Now think about that and consider all the licenses you currently hold. You need a license to get married. That shouldn't be. The state is not a partner with you in your marriage. But if you get a license to get married, then the state becomes a partner. You need a license to drive a car. And they say, oh, but that state needs to regulate the license to drive a car so that we don't have crazy people driving cars that don't know how to drive and all this other stuff. And you need licenses for almost everything. Even lawyers need a license to practice law. Why is that? The state should not be required to issue license. Now, here is Ron Paul's address before the Congress, and it's titled "The American Republic Almost Completely dead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last nail is being driven into the coffin of the American Republic, yet Congress remains in total denial as our liberties are rapidly fading before our eyes. The process is propelled by unwarranted fear and ignorance as to the true meaning of liberty. It is driven by economic myths, fallacies, and irrational good intentions. The rule of law is constantly rejected, and authoritarian answers are offered as panaceas for all our problems. Runaway welfareism is used to benefit the rich at the expense of the middle class. Who would have ever thought that the current generation and Congress would stand idly by and watch such a rapid disintegration of the American Republic? Characteristic of this epic event is the casual acceptance by the people and the political leaders of the unitary presidency, which is equivalent to granting dictatorial powers to the president. Our presidents can now, on their own, order assassinations, including American citizens, operate secret military tribunals, engage in torture, enforce indefinite imprisonments without due process, order searches and seizures without proper warrants, gutting the Fourth Amendment, ignore the 60-day rule for reporting to the Congress the nature of any military operation as required by the War Power Resolution, continue the Patriot Act abuses without oversight, wage war at will, treat all Americans as suspected terrorists at airports with TSA groping and nude x-raying. And the Federal Reserve accommodates by counterfeiting the funds needed and not paid for by taxation and borrowing, permitting runaway spending, endless debt, and special interest bailouts. And all of this is not enough. The abuses and usurpations of the war power are soon to be codified in the National Defense Authorization Act, now rapidly moving its way through Congress. Instead of repealing the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, as we should, now that bin Laden is dead and gone, Congress is planning to massively increase the war power of the president. Though an opportunity presents itself to end the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, Congress, with bipartisan support, obsesses on how to expand the unconstitutional war power of the president he already holds. The current proposal would allow a president to pursue war anytime, any place, for any reason, without congressional approval. Many believe this would even permit military activity against American suspects here at home. The proposed authority does not reference the 9/11 attacks. It would be expanded to include the Taliban and associated forces, a dangerously vague and expansive definition of our potential enemies. There is no denial that the changes in Section 1034 totally eliminates the hard-fought-for restraint on presidential authority to go to war without congressional approval achieved at the Constitutional Convention. Congress's war authority has been severely undermined since World War II, beginning with the advent of the Korean War, which was fought solely under a UN resolution. Even today, we're waging war in Libya without even consulting with the Congress, similar to how we went to war in Bosnia in the 1990s under President Clinton. The three major reasons for our constitutional conventions were to guarantee free trade and travel among the states, make gold and silver legal tender, and abolish paper money, and strictly limit the executive branch's authority to pursue war without congressional approval. But today, Federal Reserve notes are legal tender, gold and silver are illegal. The Interstate Commerce Clause is used to regulate all commerce at the expense of the free trade among the states. And now, the final nail is placed in the coffin of congressional responsibility for the war power, delivering this power completely to the president, a sharp and huge blow to the concept of our republic. In my view, it appears that the fate of the American Republic is now sealed, unless these recent trends are quickly reversed. The saddest part of this tragedy is that all these horrible changes are being done in the name of patriotism and protecting freedom. They are justified by good intentions while believing the sacrifice of liberty is required for our safety. Nothing could be further from the truth. More sadly is the conviction that our enemies are driven to attack us for our freedoms and prosperity, and not because of our deeply flawed foreign policy that has generated justifiable grievances and has inspired the radical violence against us. Without this understanding, our endless, unnamed, and undeclared wars will continue, and our wonderful experiment with liberty will end. And I yield back the balance of my time.
For the past year or so, maybe past 2 years or 3, I've been wondering about asset forfeiture. And why do the courts allow asset forfeiture to persist and exist here in Philadelphia and other cities around the country? I have been wondering, why would they allow such rules that go totally contrary to the Fourth Amendment that says you are secure in your possessions and personal property and your papers and stuff like that? Why is the government allowed, without a search warrant, without any crime, without any court proceedings, just to take your house from you and steal your property from you? Why? Well, back in the 80s and the 90s, there was a talk show host here in Philadelphia named Irv Homer. World War II veteran pilot. He flew a B-24 or B-25 bombers over Italy in World War II and stuff. And great guy. He was what I would call a real Jew. There are a lot of people that call themselves Jews that are not Jews. For instance, there are many that call themselves Jews that are bankers and etc. that believe in stealing and usury, which is totally against the Bible. There are many lawyers that believe it is their right to lie. Jesus called them succinctly that they are of their father, the devil. They are Jews who say they are Jews, but in reality they are not the sons of Abraham. Now I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the corporation of the United States. Now in 1933, United States of America became United States Incorporated. You're saying, what? I never heard of this. How did this happen? Well, it dates all the way back to Woodrow Wilson and before. Even dates back, some of the documents I have been reading date all the way back to post-Civil War. But a portion of this slide that I'm going to read to you goes like that. In prior to 1933, we all were proud and peaceful, sovereign inhabitants of America. Trading with the Enemy Act, the Confiscation Act, and the Labor Code obligated the military government to peacefully interact with American citizens and prohibited them from provoking us or act belligerently toward us, as they forfeit their ability to profit and loot and or secularize our property, equity, and credit being held in a public trust. Now, when we voluntarily or involuntarily entered their military courts of justice, one will frequently hear the prosecutor or defense lawyer argue that your comment or actions are a belligerent response and you are being combative. Key words to inform that you or someone else is about to be fleeced. Lawyers will often attempt to provoke you or your witnesses' anger in the court, just so you or they behave belligerently toward them, and this is why they do that. Under Regulation 840-10 of the Military Code, the sections of the Administrative Procedures Act and the presence of that military gold fringe flag on display in the courtroom instantly creates the state of emergency, meaning that the moment a police officer stopped you in the exercise of your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the police officer becomes a belligerent. He is armed and you're not. He displays a military rank and you're a civilian. And he has now delivered you into a military court of justice with the intent to pillage and plunder. Within the admiralty jurisdiction of that military court, which is also known as the law of prize and capture property, as defined under Title 10, Sections 7,651 to 7,681 of the Code of Military Justice, March 25th, 1982. Now we're into what's called the Admiralty Law. Now the Admiralty Law I've been looking into lately, and it is complicated. It dates all the way back to the Roman Empire, and it is the law of the seas. It's an international law. It is not a law of the United States. It is part of the international code. Now, it is time for us as Americans to wake up and to see what our politicians have been doing to us since the 1800s, and how they have secretly, through the law, have taken away our rights little by little. As I remember a Three Stooges cartoon once, inch by inch, step by step, etc. That's how they have been doing this all along. They have had a long-term plan. Why do you think both the Republican Party infrastructure and the Democratic Party all despise and hate Donald Trump as President of the United States? They hate him because he is not part of their cabal. He is not part of their infrastructure wrangling. He is not part of their scheme to make slaves of you, the American citizen. Now there was on April 7th of this year, 2019, and then I posted on the Q Research Board this thing about the Admiralty Law and about a guy by the name of Edward Mandell House, who was a advisor to Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Woodrow Wilson and Roosevelt were both socialists, or an equal term would be communist, or another equal term would be fascist. They're all the same. Woodrow Wilson was known for having reporters that reported and wrote articles that were contrary to his administration. He had them arrested, contrary to the First Amendment. They've been attacking the First Amendment all the way back in the early 1900s. The freedom of the press was not free under the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. And I'm going to read this screenshot I took, and I edited it with the GIMP, so it is not a slide. You can take a screenshot of this for yourself, or look it up on the link that's posted above. Understanding the corporate and legal system is crucial. Comments are inserted. Soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. Think birth control certificate or birth certificate. By such system design, by such methodology, we can compel people, persons, legal fictions to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency, parenthesis dollar. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. Social Security number, U.S. citizen. They will be our chattel. Persons versus people. And we will hold the security interest over them forever by operation of the law of merchant, Admiralty law. Under the scheme, the secured transactions contract law, Americans by unknowingly or unwittingly delivered the bills of lading to us will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent forever, to remain economic slaves, voluntary servitude, deception through taxation secured by their pledges, they will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us profit. And they will be none the wiser for one man in a million could ever figure our plans. And if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund the government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges, civil rights, not unalienable rights. This will inevitably reap to us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations, and leave every American a contributor or to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur. And in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the President of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America. United States Incorporated versus the United States of America. Words, grammar, hold legal meaning. Edward Mandel House, advisor to the U.S. Presidents Woodrow Wilson and FDR. Doesn't this feel exactly what life is like in America today? All stated in the early 20th century around, and he spoke this in a private conference to Woodrow Wilson. History is radically different than what is taught in schools. Be vigilant, use discernment. Now, for more on Edward Mandel House, see www.gemworld.com/edmandelhouse.htm. And for a deep dive in this deception, start with www.expose1933.com. Now, this is fairly important stuff if you really want to think about it, because this is what Mr. House was having a conference with Woodrow Wilson back during World War I. And he basically set up the Social Security system and as a Ponzi scheme, as a scheme to make themselves rich and us poor. I talk to people about the value of gold. An ounce of gold today will still buy what an ounce of gold bought 100 years ago. Gold is a commodity. Gold is real money. The Federal Reserve note is not real money. What you owe the government in Federal Reserve notes is just pieces of paper, not real assets. Real assets is gold. Now, earlier in this video, I showed you the difference between a United States note that was printed in 1953 and a Federal Reserve note, which you have it probably in your pocket. One is backed by gold, the other is backed by nothing. There is no reserve in the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private bank that just prints money. It is our responsibility to wake up. It is our responsibility to realize what our politicians are doing behind our back. Now, I talked to you a little bit ago about Irv Homer. And he always talked about a book that was written some time ago called The Creature from Jekyll Island. That's a book about the creation of the Federal Reserve. You can still buy it on Amazon. I have never read it myself personally, but I've done enough digging to know that the Federal Reserve is not our friend. The Federal Reserve is actually the enemy of the United States and is part of the Rothschild banking family and part of the Queen of England. If you want to be free, it's time to wake up. And don't believe everything you hear. Do not believe the newsman on the radio that pontificates about stuff, about how great this politician is or how evil that politician is. Do your own research. Do your own digging. And don't let somebody make a decision for you. Make your own decision. It's time to wake up and start to pay attention to what's going on, or else you will find yourself in chains as a slave of the state. The Reconstruction Act. As mentioned before, the Reconstruction Act included and changed all state officials into having federal foreign standing. The 14th Amendment deliberately forced and kept them there, and Section 2 of the Labor Code instructs that a victorious army seizes all money and movable property and holds it in trust. And this is exactly what the corporate United States government and state governments did and continue to do, because they now perceive themselves to be a victorious army. The corporate Congress, the corporate military government, and their corporate military courts of justice, however, discovered that they could not gain access to these public trusts deposited into the Federal Reserve System, which they had created using our birth registration forms, Social Security registration forms, licenses, personal property, deeds, promissory notes, equity, and credit, without including our individual persons into the bankruptcy of the United States. Treasury of 1933. So they cleverly denied our personal sovereignty and converted our persons into an appellation, which is a corporate fiction or strawman, as identified us by writing our birth names in all capital letters. All of our licenses and documents now reflect this appellation. In other words, the government considers themselves a victorious army against us. Your congressmen, your senators, all public officials consider themselves a victorious army against us, and that our property is their property. Now I understand why the cities in this country are authorized and not inhibited by the court system to do asset forfeiture and to steal a person's house from them at will. This is what your government is doing to you. It's how they think of themselves. It doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican or whatever. If they're part of the government, their job is to protect the government and not protect you. The police are not there to protect the citizens of the city. They are there to protect the government and the city itself from its own citizens. The citizens are considered the enemy of the state. Identifying corporations. In part 6 of this slideshow, the all caps name can be researched in every state code under corporations, e.g., see the Texas Administrative Code, for example, under corporations, chapter 7931, subtitled and entities. Also, the all caps name is specified in the United States Government Style Manual under the section titled Identifying Corporations. These public trusts are not a new concept. The concept and strategy was copied from the ancient Roman Empire and their use of the Roman trust. The ancient Roman trust declared that everyone had died after Rome was burned, which was a staged event. And until those Roman citizens served notice upon the Roman Senate that they were, in fact, alive and capable of managing their own estates, all were presumed dead, and the Roman Senate became the trustee over every estate and used them as they deemed appropriate. In 1933, this corporate government enticed Americans to voluntarily register for birth certificates, Social Security, driver's license, voter registration, etc., and enticed us with government benefits to do so. Years later, they obligated Americans to register for all these documents except for voter registration. Ownership. These so-called government benefits were no bargain because they belonged to all of us to begin with. And over time, the largest benefits have been watered down. What most Americans don't realize is that no corporation can operate or fund itself. Corporations require human beings and their credit and their sweat equity to finance and operate them. Therefore, everything that the government claims to own actually belongs to we the people and not to them. Everything they have been doing is one gigantic fraud, and all of it at our expense. As previously mentioned, these regulation programs were instituted so that the Federal Reserve banks and the corporate military courts of justice could scrutinize and monetize the public trust accounts. Each birth certificate and Social Security card was eventually converted into a trust account and became a government security, the company's stocks and bonds, and as marketed as a mutual fund. If you own a piece of a mutual fund investment, you are actually hedging your money against human collateral. Now you are the property of the state. Every bond or investment security is assigned a cusp number. And if you know how to use that formula, or have a close friend who is a stockbroker, you or he can convert the number and letters found in your Social Security card into a cusp number. Armed with those cusp numbers, you can look up their mutual funds, and your life is being collectively marketed under. Your birth certificate is handled the same way. Our forced registration of birth actually made us the personal property of the state. Each of us knowingly gave our children away to the government of the state where they were born when we registered them for a government-issued birth certificate, which is how the state government controls child custody. Our children are now their collective property, and we are permitted to keep and raise them, providing that we behave ourselves and comply with their corporate laws and regulations. The state obligates us to pay for our children, and they generally object to pay for anything unless we become dead and destitute. It is also the birth certificate that provides the police with the authority to break and enter any house under suspicion of abuse. But now the Patriot Act covers all other situations. A free, simple deed gave the state your home and the right to tax you into poverty as a tenant, and the Patriot Act eliminated the need for search warrants. The Patriot Act is a fraud. Ever since it was created after 9/11, it was created to enslave the American people. Just look at how, if you take an airplane flight, how you are frisked and how you are mistreated by the authorities at the airport. They despise you. The government despises you. And this is not for your protection. They haven't protected anybody. But the government has set up the Patriot Act to protect themselves from you, the citizens. Finally, we come to the last slide. And the last slide asks a very serious question. Do you really own your home? You are no longer the king of your castle, which was guaranteed by the alloidal deed, because you are no longer own a castle. Your personal lawyer set that one up too, and received a large one-time secret kickback from the state government on your first tax bill, in addition to the fees you pay to him to represent your best interest. Devious people, aren't they? When our deeds were alloidal, no one could trespass on our property, not even the government. No one could tax your property, and no bank could foreclose on your property. But there again, no bank would ever loan you money against your property either. We were the kings and sovereign rulers of our land and homes. Do you now see how the government has been chipping away at your basic rights and freedoms? It goes a lot deeper than that. The government can confiscate your home from you. And they don't need a search warrant. They don't need anything. Just they say, it is now ours. This has happened many times in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, the city government turns it into a profit for themselves. Think about that. Now I post the videos that I make on my Freedom's social video channel, BitChute, Bright Eon Video, YouTube, and DTube. The reason I cross-post is because I do not trust Google and YouTube. I have social media accounts on Gab, Twitter, Facebook, Minds. And Alphabet Corporation, which owns Google and YouTube are censoring conservative speech. They censor preachers. They arbitrarily remove videos. They shadow ban. These companies behave in a despicable manner. Thus, I cross-post. And hopefully, my videos will survive on the internet. And finally, I'd like to give gratitude to all the fine folks that make this video possible. These are the folks that created all the software that I use. I use open source software, I use the Arch Linux system, and I use KDEN Live and the GIMP along with Kyphos and other programs. And I want to thank all the fine developers that have worked so hard and put their efforts into making this fine open source free software for us all to use, so that these videos can be published. Thank you, and have a very great day, and may God bless you. Bye-bye.